Okay, thank you, Bang Boltak. Um, Very well-known economist. Actually, I want to hear more from you, yeah, for this matter. But taking it from my side, my POV as a trade economist. So I'm seeing the industry is actually, a consequence of what happened with the trade policies. But first, as an outline, I will give the facts and then the consequence, and the third one is the roadmap. How about the facts? Given the current announcement of the GDP in the first quarter, we have the contribution of the industry is about 19% for the overall economy. Is it good or bad? It depends. 19%, of course, this is actually the biggest contributors of all the sectors. But if you're seeing the timeline, from the early 2000, the contribution is slowly diminishing. Maybe it's not slowly diminishing, it's rapidly diminishing. Roderick, once in 2016 or 2018, wrote an article in NBR stating that most of the emerging countries, of course, Indonesia is one of it, is experiencing a deindustrialization. In the early 2000, we have the contribution about 26%. Now we have 19%. But most of the time, especially coming from the Ministry of Industry, we have having the series of denial over denial, sugarcoating everywhere. They say that, oh, we are good. Our PMI is expanding from January, December, January, February. But you're not looking in a very comprehensive view. Purchasing Manager Index in manufacturing in December, January, and February is a seasonal effect. What happened in April, 46.7, a contraction. Why? Because the producers overshot. They bought more, but the demand is low. But we are experiencing more, nevertheless, a period of premature deindustrialization. As a consequence, our growth is suboptimal. As you can see from the current figure of the manufacturing sector, for example, in the first quarter, it grew 4.5%. 4.5%. Our economy, the economy is growing 4.87%, but the manufacturing sector 4.55%, as opposed to, for example, in agriculture, 10%. 10% is actually more than enough. But most of the time, when we are talking about agriculture, we are talking about commodity-based, low value added. And it experienced a very high growth, especially during February. We have the export of commodities, 14% growth year on year, coming from the effect of depreciation. It's not sustainable. Bang Dede once said, Pak Khatib Basri said, we can actually, use this, the so-called, Trump said that this is currency manipulation. We can actually export more because we are having a currency depreciation. Yes, but only in the short term. But in the long term, as we might see the data last year, 5 months in a row, we have the PMI contraction below 50, one of which coming from the cost of production. And the cost of production is coming from the rupiah's depreciation. So, as a consequence, I'm moving to the second part. As a consequence, we have the suboptimal growth. I once wrote in 2017 the interlinkages of variables in exchange rate and trade and also deindustrialization. We are repeatedly saying that if our rupiah is under pressure, this is actually the problem of the central bank. We are always saying that this is because of Pak Perry is not doing his work very well. You need to tackle the rupiah. But from my empirical study, we found that this rupiah depreciation is just a symptoms. Just like when you're sick, you have high fever. The fever is not the sickness. The fever is the symptoms. You want to give medicine, paracetamol. You're giving it. Of course, we have a low fever. But what is actually the illness? We're not seeing the illness here. It's just the symptoms. And then we take medicine over medicine over medicine. So our bodies cannot actually cope with that. Our kidney will be actually abrupted because of this series of medicine. The interest rate is going up, for example, to tackle the exchange rate, but it's not the issue. You're only actually, destroying the economy. What we need is actually the illness. What is the illness? The industry. Because export is surplus of production. Okay? So the surplus of production, when we are having a deficit, for example, in the long run we're going to have deficit. Although last time we have a trade surplus 59 times in a row. We have trade surplus, but it will actually slowly diminish. It's not long last because it's actually commodity based. What happened in 2012 and 2013? After the series of commodity boom, we have the deficit, almost 3% or maybe more than 3% of deficit. As a consequence, our rupiah is getting depressed. The fair value of rupiah nowadays, according to my forecast, the current account deficit this year is about 1.5%. Therefore, the rupiah is actually, the fair value is about 16,400 because, according to my calculation, because they intervene 3 billion to 4 billion US dollar to maintain the rupiah at this current level. But as the very foundation of rupiah, the industry is not thriving very well. So we need to actually incentivize the industry. How? Okay. Then we go to the third part, the roadmap. The Ministry of Industry. I was actually the speaker of, the spokesperson of the Minister of Trade in 2020. We have a very opposing views between Minister of Trade and Minister of Industry. So one is very liberal, one is very protective. The Ministry of Industry will give more of the local content requirement, will give more of the tariff, will give non-tariff barriers, non-tariff measures, and so on and so forth. So to protect our industry. But empirically speaking, also, I have my senior, Lilian Ng, wrote a book. She wrote a book in area, if I'm not mistaken, about the local content requirement. Cross-country analysis. The local content requirement is not the medicine that we need to push the industry. For the case of Indonesia, my empirical findings actually mention that you have the local content requirement going up, but at the same time the industry is going down. What happened? Because we cannot have cheap input of production. We are actually being left behind in the regional production network. We are becoming left behind. I wrote in my book, Globalization, Productivity, and Production Network in ASEAN, in terms of the global participation and the regional participation ranking in ASEAN, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia. We are left behind. Of course, in this trade war, we are actually quite okay. Okay, but Bang Dede repeatedly saying, yeah, the contribution of trade is just very minimal. But hey, you have to actually expand the timeline. The prosperous time is actually even, even bigger. It's even actually lengthy than if you compare it with the worst time. So, in a way that we cannot actually participate in the global and the regional progression network, so that our growth is suboptimal. In order to incentivize this industry, we need to be more liberalized. Ironically speaking, we need Trump to do that. We have the USTR telling us to, hey, you need to cope with your TKDN, local content requirement. Hey, the import quota is just too much. I'm preaching this every week to my students. My PhD in international trade. I'm preaching this every time. When the president came, he spoke about the TKDN and also import quota. I'm very happy. And I asked my friend at the One Economy National, Firman, who said this to the president? I don't know. Maybe just a random thought. Yeah. But I'm very happy. We need actually to, use this momentum. 2 weeks ago, I was invited to the Ministry of Trade. The Minister of Trade asked me to actually explain the process of trade policy deregulation. So I'm very happy. So I'm preaching all of the trade liberalization. You need to lower the TKDN. You need to go with the Minister of Industry, the local content requirement. Maybe if you want that to be in place, okay, but maybe 10 to 15%, not 35%. What about the import quota? Import quota, according to the textbook, is even in the textbook, is the worst part of the trade policies. It's taking away the consumer surplus, and it's actually rent-seeking behavior, and the government is not getting anything. If you want to impose trade policies, they're very minimal. Although, if you ask me as a trade economist, you open all. But yeah, if I want to put my empathy to the Ministry of Industry, okay, you can have the trade policies, but maybe import tariff or maybe safeguards. Yeah, it's only temporary. Yeah, to protect our industry because of maybe, for example, the Minister of Industry asked me, what happened if the China dump all their products here while we are opening up? Okay, you use the safeguards instead. So it's only temporary for temporary injury. So as a roadmap, paradoxically, ironically speaking, if you want to actually protect the industry, you need to open up. If you want to grow, you need to export more. At least you need 3 pillars. The first pillars to have this industrial growth is human capital. The second one is infrastructure. And the third one is institution. But most of the time, this third factor, institution, plays a more dominant role. Yesterday, I went to, what do you call it? ISE. What do we call it in English?
Association of
Economic, Economist, Association of Economists. So I actually deliver a book review on Acemoglu, Power and Progress, the newest book, Power and Progress. All of the book in Acemoglu are always actually stating about institution. What is institution? According to Kaufman Index, the World Governance Indicator, 6 dimensions of institutions: political stability, government effectiveness, rule of law, regulatory quality, control of corruption, and voice and accountability. So actually, when we are talking about institution, we are talking about also the rule of law and regulatory quality, trade policies. It's very bad. So we need to, use this momentum. We have Trump, ironically, to help us deregulate our trade policies and also our industrial policies. Okay. So then we can actually negotiate with Trump. At the same time, we can invite more investment. Our current figure of, to wrap up, our current figure of the gross fixed capital formation, the growth is only 2%. So it's very minimal. So you need to, push this even more through liberalization in policies.